U.S. President Donald Trump is warning of an economic and national security disaster if the Supreme Court overturns its use of emergency powers to impose sweeping tariffs on nearly every country. Speaking Monday, Trump claimed the tariffs have generated trillions in tariff and investment income.
The numbers were reported so incorrectly. The real numbers are trillions of dollars have been taken in or gotten in terms of investment from the tariffs.
Trump had previously floated the idea of using tariff revenues to pay for what he calls a dividend to lower-earning Americans, and repeated his plans on Monday.
We're going to issue a dividend to our middle-income people and lower-income people of about $2,000. And we're going to use the remaining tariffs to lower our debt.
Trump calling the Mueller probe an illegal investigation and giving new hints about Jeff Sessions' future in the Trump administration. Trump saying that his job is safe, at least until the midterm elections. That news amid new reporting that President Trump and his allies, or I should say his allies, are worrying about the White House. The White House is about to get caught flat-footed amid a crush of potential investigations. And as Trump struggles to get his story straight on the very latest White House official to be stepping down. That counsel, Don McGahn, first Trump tweeting his son-in-law and daughter had nothing to do with the so-called pushing out of Don McGahn.
Okay, so let me just say this right off the bat. A federal judge is moving toward arresting Trump administration officials. Like actual arrest, not fines, not warnings, arrest. And this isn't some liberal activist judge throwing a tantrum. This is a federal judge in Chicago who caught senior Homeland Security and ICE officials lying under oath in her courtroom. Yeah, lying. In court. While defending mass immigration raids that have detained over 3,000 people in Illinois alone. Come on, you can't make this stuff up. Here's what happened. Trump's team launched something called Operation Midway Blitz back in September. Sounds tough, sounds decisive, sounds like they're getting things done, right? Well, it turns out they've been rounding up thousands of people using force that a federal judge just declared unlawful. And when they got called into court to explain themselves, they lied. They lied about what happened. They lied about why they used tear gas on protesters. They lied about violent confrontations that apparently never happened the way they claimed. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Supreme Court justices cast doubt on Trump's authority to impose tariffs under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which contains no references to tariffs. Justice Amy Coney Barrett suggested it could be a mess for the courts to administer refunds to U.S. importers who have paid tariffs that were declared illegal. Trump took issue with media reports about the amount of duties collected that the government might have to repay if the Supreme Court agrees with a lower court that Trump's sweeping tariffs were illegal.
So they're not giving the right numbers. It would be an economic disaster. It would be a national security disaster if we lost the case in the Supreme Court.
It remains unclear exactly when the highest court will rule and whether companies will be entitled to refunds of more than $100 billion in IEEPA tariffs paid so far if Trump loses. The tariff debate comes as Trump's poll numbers have slipped in recent months, with growing public frustration over inflation and economic uncertainty, driving voters toward Democrats in recent elections. Yet Trump hailed what he called a decline in inflation since he took office, arguing that food prices and energy prices were coming down.
And Judge Sarah Ellis? She's not having it. On November 6th, she issued a preliminary injunction blocking federal agents from using force the way they've been using it. And in that hearing, she said something absolutely wild. She said, and I'm quoting here, Defendant Bovenot admitted that he lied. A senior official under oath admitted he fabricated details about violent protesters to justify using tear gas. Are you kidding me? This is wild. So now we've got a judge who's so furious about being lied to in her own courtroom that she's taking steps toward immediate arrest of key Trump officials. And here's the thing. ICE isn't backing down. They're saying they aren't leaving Chicago. They're vowing to continue raids even as they face threats of contempt or actual arrest from a federal judge. It's like they think they're above the law or something. And look, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, well, they're just enforcing immigration law. What's the big deal? But here's the thing. The ACLU and the National Immigrant Justice Center are saying that the tactics ICE has been using are unlawful in the vast majority of arrests. We're not talking about a few bad apples here. We're talking about systematic abuse of power, constitutional violations, and now outright lying in federal court. This is the kind of story that should be on every news channel. But you know what? It's not getting the coverage it deserves because it's complicated, because it's messy, because it doesn't fit into a neat 30-second soundbite. But this matters. This matters because it's about whether the rule of law still means anything in this country. It's about whether government officials can just lie in court and face no consequences. It's about whether the Trump administration thinks it can bulldoze over constitutional rights in the name of enforcement. And here's what makes this even more insane. This isn't the first time Trump's aggressive immigration push has led to arrests of people in the legal system. Earlier this year, they arrested a state judge, because she wouldn't cooperate with their courthouse arrest tactics. So now we've got Trump officials arresting judges and judges threatening to arrest Trump officials. Like, what kind of constitutional crisis are we heading toward here? The judge has already ordered the release of 615 people who were detained in this crackdown. 615 people. And the government fought it every step of the way, even after their own officials admitted to lying. Come on, if you're fighting to keep people detained after you've been caught lying about why you detained them, what does that say about your priorities? And you want to know what's really messed up about this? The timing. We're living in a moment where immigration is one of the most divisive issues in American politics, where every story gets spun 1,000 different ways depending on which side you're on, where people can't even agree on basic facts anymore. And into this chaos, we've got government officials actively lying to justify mass arrests and a judge who's finally saying enough is enough. So yeah, buckle up, because we're about to dive deep into this absolute mess. We're going to talk about what Operation Midway Blitz actually is, why ICE officials thought it was okay to lie in federal court, what this judge is so angry about, and what it means for the future of immigration enforcement in this country. And trust me, by the end of this, you're going to understand why this story is way bigger than just some immigration raids in Chicago. This is about power, about accountability, and about whether anyone in the Trump administration has to follow the rules anymore. Let's get into it. All right. So let's back up and really break down what's been going on in Illinois. Because if you've only been following the headlines, you probably think this is just another story about Trump cracking down on illegal immigration. But it's so much more complicated than that and so much more disturbing. Operation Midway Blitz started in September. The Trump administration, fresh into dealing with immigration issues in his second term, decided to go all in on enforcement. And when I say all in, I mean all in. We're talking massive raids, thousands of arrests, and tactics that civil rights groups are calling unconstitutional. Since September, more than 3,000 people have been arrested and detained in Illinois alone. 3,000. That's not a targeted operation, that's a dragnet. Now, the government's position is simple. They say they're enforcing the law. They say they're going after people who are in the country illegally. And look, if that's what they were actually doing, in a lawful way, following constitutional procedures, then fine. We can have a debate about immigration policy, but that's not what's happening here. Here's where it gets messy. The ACLU and the National Immigrant Justice Center started documenting what was actually going down during these raids, and what they found was, to put it mildly, really bad. They're saying that the vast majority of these arrests were unlawful. Not some of them, not a few of them, the vast majority. We're talking about agents showing up without proper warrants, using excessive force, detaining U.S. citizens by mistake, and basically treating constitutional rights like suggestions rather than laws. And then, when advocacy groups started pushing back, when protesters showed up at detention facilities, ICE responded with force. They used tear gas, they used physical intimidation, and when they got dragged into court to explain why they did all of this, they lied about it. That's where this Bovino guy comes in. He's a senior official, and he testified under oath about what happened during confrontations with protesters. He said there were violent clashes. He said protesters were attacking agents. He said they had no choice but to use tear gas to protect themselves. And Judge Ellis, she listened to all of this, and then she looked at the evidence, and the evidence told a completely different story. Come on. You can't just make stuff up in federal court. That's not how this works. So in the November 6th hearing, Judge Ellis called him out. She said flat out that defendant Bovino admitted he lied. He admitted it under oath. He fabricated details about violent confrontations to justify using force against protesters. And once that came out, the whole thing started to unravel. The judge issued a preliminary injunction. She blocked federal agents from continuing to use force the way they've been using it. She ordered the release of 615 people who had been detained during this crackdown, and she made it very clear that she was considering holding Trump officials in contempt, which could lead to arrest. Now here's where it gets even crazier. ICE's response to all of this, they basically said, we don't care. They put out statements saying they aren't leaving Chicago. They're vowing to continue enforcement operations. even as a federal judge is threatening them with contempt and arrest. It's like they think they're untouchable or something. And you know what? Maybe they do think they're untouchable, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is part of a broader pattern with this administration. Earlier this year, Trump's immigration enforcement team arrested a state judge. Her name hasn't been widely reported, but the story is insane. She was presiding over cases in her courthouse, and ICE agents wanted to arrest people right there in the courthouse. She said no. She said it violated court protocol and constitutional protections, so they arrested her. Are you kidding me? They arrested a judge for doing her job, for protecting the integrity of the legal system, and the administration defended it. They said she was obstructing justice, that she was helping criminals escape, that she was putting politics over law enforcement. But come on, that's not what happened. What happened is she stood up for the rule of law, and they punished her for it. So now we've got this situation in Chicago, where another judge is standing up for the rule of law, and the Trump administration is digging in. They're not backing down. They're not apologizing for the lies. They're not changing their tactics. They're just doubling down and daring the judge to do something about it. And here's the thing that most people don't understand about this story. This isn't really about immigration. It's framed as an immigration enforcement issue, but at its core, this is about power. This is about whether the executive branch has to follow court orders. This is about whether government officials can lie under oath and face no consequences. This is about whether constitutional rights still matter when the government decides it really, really wants to arrest someone. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Fifth Amendment guarantees due process. These aren't suggestions. These aren't guidelines that the government can ignore when it's inconvenient. These are constitutional protections that every person in this country, regardless of immigration status, is entitled to. And what the ACLU and NIJC are arguing is that ICE has been systematically violating these rights during Operation Midway Blitz. Think about what that means. If the government can round up thousands of people without proper warrants, without due process, without accountability, then who's safe? Today it's immigrants in Chicago. Tomorrow it could be protesters in Portland. Next week it could be political dissidents in any city in America. Once you establish that the government doesn't have to follow constitutional procedures, you've opened a door that's really hard to close. And the lying in court thing? That's a whole other level of dangerous. Because if government officials can lie under oath to justify their actions and face no consequences for it, then what's stopping them from lying about anything? What's stopping them from fabricating evidence? What's stopping them from framing innocent people? The only thing that keeps the justice system working is the assumption that people tell the truth under oath. Once that assumption breaks down, the whole system falls apart. Judge Ellis understands this. That's why she's so angry. That's why she's taking the extraordinary step of moving toward arresting government officials. Because she knows that if she lets this slide, if she lets them get away with lying in her courtroom, then she's basically saying that the rule of law doesn't apply to the Trump administration. And she's not willing to say that. So now we've got this standoff. A federal judge versus the Trump administration's immigration enforcement apparatus. And neither side is backing down. The judge has the law on her side, but the administration they have power. They have the backing of the executive branch. They have ICE agents who are willing to keep conducting raids, even under threat of contempt. And they have a base of supporters who see this whole thing as just another example of liberal judges trying to obstruct Trump's agenda. But here's what nobody's really talking about, the human cost of all this. 3,000 arrests means 3,000 families affected. 3,000 people pulled from their homes, their jobs, their lives. And according to the ACLU, most of these arrests were unlawful, which means most of these people shouldn't have been detained in the first place. Think about that for a second. You're going about your life. Maybe you're working. Maybe you're taking your kids to school, and suddenly federal agents show up. They don't have a proper warrant. They don't verify your immigration status correctly, but they detain you anyway. And then you're stuck in detention while the government figures out whether they made a mistake. Days pass, weeks pass, your job is gone, your family is panicking, and all of this is happening because the Trump administration prioritized big arrest numbers over following the law. Can you believe this? This is wild, and it's only going to get wilder. Okay, so let's break this down into what actually matters, because there's a lot of noise around this story, but there are really three core issues that we need to focus on. First, the scope of Operation Midway Blitz is insane. 3,000 arrests in Illinois since September. Think about that number for a second. That's not targeted enforcement. That's not going after specific individuals with criminal records or outstanding warrants. That's mass detention. And according to the ACLU and the National Immigrant Justice Center, the vast majority of these arrests were unlawful. We're talking about people being detained without proper legal basis, families being separated, U.S. citizens being caught up in the dragnet because agents couldn't be bothered to verify immigration status before making arrests. And here's what makes it worse. The administration knew this was happening. They had to know. You don't arrest 3,000 people without somebody in charge looking at the numbers and saying, hey, are we doing this right? But instead of pumping the brakes, instead of making sure they were following constitutional procedures, they just kept going. Because the goal wasn't lawful enforcement. The goal was big numbers. The goal was being able to say, look how tough we are on immigration. Look how many people we're arresting. Come on. That's not justice. That's a publicity stunt with people's lives. And let's talk about the logistics for a second. To arrest and process 3,000 people, you need detention facilities. You need staff. You need lawyers. You need judges. The immigration court system was already overwhelmed before Operation Midway Blitz even started. Now you're dumping 3,000 more cases into a system that can't handle it, which means people are sitting in detention for months waiting for hearings. People who in many cases shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. Second, government officials lied in federal court. Let me say that again because it bears repeating. Government officials lied in federal court. Under oath, a senior Homeland Security official named Bovino admitted that he fabricated details about violent confrontations with protesters to justify using tear gas. He made it up. And he did it to justify using force against American citizens who were exercising their First Amendment right to protest. This is like fundamentally un-American. We're supposed to be a country where the government has to tell the truth, where officials are held accountable when they lie, where the justice system punishes perjury regardless of who commits it. But instead, we've got Trump administration officials lying to justify their actions. And then when they get caught, they just shrug and keep doing what they were doing. And you know what the scary part is? This probably isn't the only time they've lied. This is just the time they got caught. How many other cases are out there where ICE agents or Homeland Security officials lied on reports, lied in affidavits, lied to judges, and nobody ever found out because nobody had the resources to investigate? The ACLU and NIJC only caught this because they had lawyers who could dig into the details and challenge the government's version of events. But most people being detained don't have those resources. Most people don't have advocacy groups fighting for them. So they just get swept up in a system based on lies, and nobody ever knows. Can you believe this? And let's be clear about what lying in court actually means. When you testify under oath, you're swearing to tell the truth. You're acknowledging that lying is a crime. It's called perjury, and it's a felony. Regular people go to prison for perjury. But when a government official does it to justify using force against protesters, apparently that's just what? A mistake? An oversight? No big deal? That's not how this is supposed to work. Third, IC is defying a federal judge's order. Judge Ellis issued a preliminary injunction. She blocked the use of force. She ordered the release of 615 people. And IC's response was, nah, we're good. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. They put out public statements saying they aren't leaving Chicago. They're vowing to continue enforcement operations, even as the judge is moving toward holding them in contempt. This is a constitutional crisis in the making. Because if the executive branch can just ignore court orders, then what's the point of having courts? What's the point of having judges? What's the point of having a system of checks and balances if one branch of government can just say, yeah, we don't feel like following the rules today? And look, I know some people are going to say this is about immigration enforcement and we need to be tough on illegal immigration and blah, blah, blah. But that's not what this is about. You can be tough on immigration and still follow the law. You can enforce immigration policy and still respect constitutional rights. You can deport people who are in the country illegally and still tell the truth in court. These aren't contradictory goals. What the Trump administration is doing isn't tough enforcement, it's lawless enforcement. And there's a huge difference. So why does this matter? Why should you care about immigration raids in Chicago and some judge threatening to arrest government officials? Here's why. Because this is about precedent. This is about what kind of country we're going to be. If we let the government get away with mass arrests without proper legal basis, if we let officials lie in court with no consequences, if we let the executive branch ignore judicial orders, then we're no longer a country governed by laws. We're a country governed by whoever has the most power at any given moment. And yeah, maybe you support Trump. Maybe you think illegal immigration is a huge problem and we need to crack down hard. Fine. But ask yourself this. Do you want the next president, whoever that is, to have the power to arrest thousands of people without proper warrants? Do you want future administrations to be able to lie in court and face no consequences? Do you want a precedent where the executive branch can just ignore judges it doesn't like? Because that's what you're signing up for. If you defend what's happening in Chicago right now, You're signing up for a world where constitutional protections are optional, where the rule of law only applies when it's convenient, where the government can do whatever it wants as long as it has enough political support. And that should terrify you, regardless of your politics. So what happens next? Well, Judge Ellis is moving forward with contempt proceedings. She could hold Trump officials in contempt of court. She could issue arrest warrants. And if she does, we're going to see a showdown between the judicial branch and the executive branch, because I guarantee you, Trump is not going to let his immigration officials get arrested without a fight. He's going to claim judicial overreach. He's going to say liberal judges are obstructing his agenda. He's going to rally his base around the idea that he's being persecuted for trying to enforce the law, and his base will believe it, because that's how this works now. Facts don't matter. The law doesn't matter. All that matters is the narrative. But here's the thing. Judge Ellis has the facts on her side. She has testimony from government officials admitting they lied. She has evidence of constitutional violations. She has the law backing up her decisions, and she's not backing down. This is going to get ugly, and it's going to get ugly fast. The Trump administration has bet everything on the idea that they can push through their agenda regardless of what courts say. They've arrested judges who got in their way. They've defied court orders. They've lied under oath to justify their actions. And so far, they've gotten away with it. But Judge Ellis might be the judge who finally says no more. And if that happens, if she actually follows through and has Trump officials arrested for contempt, then we're in completely uncharted territory, because we'll have federal law enforcement officials being arrested for defying a federal judge's orders. And that, my friends, is a constitutional crisis. The broader implications here are staggering. We're watching in real time as the executive branch tests the limits of judicial authority. We're seeing what happens when government officials decide that court orders are optional. And we're getting a preview of what American governance looks like when the rule of law becomes negotiable. So yeah, keep your eyes on Chicago. Keep your eyes on Judge Sarah Ellis, because what happens in her courtroom over the next few weeks could determine whether the rule of law still means anything in America, or whether we've officially entered an era where power is the only thing that matters. This is wild, and it's only going to get wilder. I'll be covering every development as it happens, so make sure you're subscribed, because you're not going to want to miss what comes next.